Thank you for the introduction. You forgot to add that I know nothing about 5G, and that's the panel that I'll be moderating, which is in a way fine because I think we have quite a great panel that know a lot about digital networks. But what I would like to add before we get into 5G or LoRa or whatever the technologies are is the why, and that's maybe building a little bit on where Alvin earlier this morning ended his session. And that is, why are we really doing all this? Technology changes and new technologies come and go, and yes, we need to spend millions and billions of dollars in it, and that's all given, but if we don't understand what the purpose of all this is, then we just end up with a lot of tech, and those that study math or go to the big universities and do artificial intelligence know what to do with it, but how does this impact all of us? And frankly, that's in part why I left Cisco and joined an academic institution, because I'm thinking of our children and your children and the next generation of workforce whose jobs are standing to be disrupted, if not maybe lost, and new jobs being created because of a lot what we're doing here. And we're seeing a lot of change in our demographics. We see millennials being now the biggest workforce, centennials, those are born after 1995, they're now coming into the workforce, and they call it the alpha generation is now being born since 2012, 2013. So frankly, in about 10 to 15 years, they'll be your bosses, and they're going to have very different expectations. That's what the world of IoT and technology is going to mean to them. Now, it's not just the demographics that are making these changes profound, but it's the economic changes, social changes, what's happening in the world, and we see it all around us. And then obviously the technology changes that Alvin and Robert spoke about this morning. There's the foundational technologies that we don't even think about anymore. We, and probably our children, take them for granted, and that is access to mobile technologies, the use of video, the Internet of Things. It's kind of this thing that's there, and it's everywhere, but it's almost like, what does it matter as long as it's there? Security, digital networks. But the more interesting is the next generation of advanced technologies, from AI to blockchain to autonomous and all those things that are coming at us at a speed, frankly, that we've never seen before. And that's a good thing, because that's, I think, why we're all in business probably. The speed of innovation is accelerating, but that in itself is not new. So here's a quick question. Does anybody know what this is? I think you do. Picture on the left, horse and buggies, 1900. In New York City. There's one car there. There it is. How long would it have taken to get rid of all those horses and turn those into cars on the right? Any guesses? We don't have enough time, really, so I'm going to give you the answer. Oh, it disappeared. 13 years. In 1913, no more horses. So we've seen this rapid change come at us in previous centuries, and the biggest difference, I think, now is that what we're seeing now is impacting everybody. Nobody is immune to the change that is coming at us at a faster pace. So disruption at every layer and every business is inevitable, and the need to transform our businesses is unavoidable. And we see this through kind of three key phases. First one is, how do we use all this technology, all these amazing capabilities to enable what it is that we do? How do we increase productivity, reduce costs, do what we do smarter, faster, and frankly, many of your customers are in the midst of this wave of digital transformation. Then take it up a notch, and that is, how do we start to differentiate ourselves? Maybe think differently about how we connect supply-demand and how we use things like the Internet of Things to reimagine our business, which really leads to the third wave, and that is, how do we completely redefine our industries? And if we don't, then some startup out of the University of Ottawa will come and cannibalize, for instance, the business, and that has to change. Now, this made way for the digital economy, the companies like Amazon and Uber and Lyft, and obviously those examples we all know, but every business is going through this transformation. From mining, Barrick Gold, reimagining itself and creating a completely autonomous mine, no people anymore, drones, robots, AI, everything automated, completely changing how it does its business, to London Hydro, reimagining itself from being a utility company to being a data company and a digital company first. Municipalities that are looking at blockchain and the Internet of Things to transform how it delivers services. And then in real estate, how every light bulb and light fixture and thermostat and everything imaginable becomes an IoT connected device. And through AI and deep machine learning, we can make buildings respond better to our needs. So this is happening in all industries and all companies. And we're seeing a bunch of, that they all have something in common, and they take a programmatic approach to digital transformation. And the two things that really glues this together is the top layer, starting with why, what's the value we want to create, what do we contribute to tomorrow's digital marketplace, and at the bottom, having a secure, scalable, resilient digital infrastructure that is enabling us or allowing us to grow and to be agile and to change our businesses. And that's where we see massive growth, a massive need, more and more data, and maybe more importantly, a mirage of infrastructure technologies that are going to make way for us to transform the businesses as we know them. From building networks to wide area networks, LoRa, in networks in your home, all the way to 5G. And this is where our panel comes in. They live and breathe this each and every day. They're building and imagining what our future networks need to look like so that each and every one of you and every one of your customers can continue to transform their business and innovate and really be ahead in a very competitive digital world. So with that, we're going to shift here to our speakers, and we're going to ask them to introduce themselves briefly, who they are, what they do in the company that they're with, and kind of an opening statement as they see the world of digital infrastructure change. We then have a bunch of questions we'd like to discuss, but if possible, we'd like to keep about 10 minutes or so, maybe less since they took 10 minutes from us. If you have a question. I think most of them are around over lunch, so you remember what they look like. I'm sure they'd be willing to answer more questions. So I think we're going in alphabetical order. So Chris from Juniper, maybe would you like to kick it off?
Sure. So Chris Bachalo from Juniper. I'm based here in Ottawa. So with Juniper, I look after our service provider cloud and mobile cloud strategies and solution development. So we have a large team here in the Canada area, actually several hundred engineers working on software development, our Junos operating system, our IP optical products and strategy. So in the context of this panel, which of course is 5G and large-scale IoT, Juniper's role in that is to produce products and solutions that enable high performance, high scale solutions, communication solutions with minimal operational overhead. So that is our primary focus and our solution creation in this subject matter. So prior engagement, so Juniper's been a long-standing member with CENGN, a lot of joint development over the past 3 years. We're a founding Tier 1 member. We helped shape the mandate of CENGN moving forward. We built a smart city showcase together over the past couple of years, which we actually demonstrated outside these doors here in last year's summit. And we took that messaging over to the Eureka Smart City Summit in Stockholm and London. We've done joint hackathons across Canada for Canadian university students. We co-hosted with CENGN and with Ali here at Telus. CENGN has hosted Juno certification events on behalf of Juniper in Canada, here in Canada. So we've had a really tight relationship with CENGN, an excellent experience with CENGN with great return on our investment as a Tier 1 member.
Thank you, Chris. Next up, Dan from 11X.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Mathers. I've spent about 10 years in the Toronto ecosystem working with IBM and Celestica, then 10 years up here in Ottawa from the mid-90s onwards, and then now the last 11 years have been in the Waterloo region. So 11X is a company that is a national wireless carrier. We've got coverage from coast to coast, from Vancouver to Halifax, in about 22 markets, soon to be expanding to to a total of about 30 markets, which should cover most of the major cities. Actually, the map looks very, very close to what Robert was showing earlier in terms of CENGN's coverage across the country. For those of you who aren't familiar with LoRa WAN, that's the technology that we've deployed. It's a low-power wide area network that operates in the unlicensed band. It's an international open standard. It's got about 50 operators, including major companies such as Orange and South Korea Telecom in Asia and Europe, and many others. There's about 500 member companies, including IBM and Cisco and many other large multinationals. And really, the benefit of the technology and choosing this technology and why we chose it is to enable all of those use cases for IoT that require a very low total cost of ownership in terms of the device costs themselves, as well as the connectivity, wireless connectivity fees. And then in addition to that, enabling all of the use cases that require battery-operated operation, since these devices can operate for 10 to 15 years on a couple of AA batteries. Very specific use cases, that require, maybe just bleeping out a little bit of information every 15, 20 minutes. The temperature's 15 degrees, there's a car parked here, like that sort of stuff, as opposed to the very high bandwidth, low latency applications that typically the cellular networks will address. So very happy to be here. We're definitely part of CENGN, very happy to be part of it. We provide the low power wide area network for CENGN members to operate under and to use and develop their applications. So, thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Next up, Claudio from EXFO.
Yes, so good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. So Claudio Mazzuca, I'm Vice President for Systems and Analytics Division at EXFO. So just to give you a bit of background behind EXFO, so EXFO is a Canadian-based technology solution provider for the telecom and web scale industry, actually based in Quebec City. So that's where our headquarters is located, but we have development offices in Quebec, Montreal, and Toronto. And internationally, we've expanded our development capabilities in Boston, California, France now with a recent acquisition, London, as well as Finland. So we're an international company. We're working with all the major operators globally. A bit about EXFO in terms of what we do specifically. We're the #1 leader in fiber optic field test and measurement. We have about 42% of the market, of the global market. Now, over the last 10 years, EXFO has expanded, understanding that networks are changing and moving way more software, dynamic, IP-based. So even after the last 12 months, we've made 4 acquisitions, 3 of them in the area that I'm responsible for. So one in the area of optical RF measurements, because as we'll see in the discussions today, obviously the RAN is going to be an important part of the puzzle. Secondly, a company in UK called Ontology System that really looks at kind of understanding the entire topology of the network, how the network's connected to services and how customers are connected to the network. And I think that's a key component for you to, as an operator, a telecom provider, to understand the state of the network and how it's behaving. And lastly, an acquisition in France called Estelia that's really focused on customer experience. And we heard on the panels this morning how that's going to be key, especially as we get into this more software dynamic environment. So we felt that was a key component. So our real goal and how it relates to 5G and IoT is really helping our customers go through these transformations, bringing our expertise in test and measurement, because it is a specific expertise. And we're working with customers as they transform to fiber deeper into the network. I think sometimes it's one of the things we don't think about because it's there, but it needs to be managed and properly deployed. Secondly, as you move towards more of a cloud infrastructure, how do we make sure that those elements that are running in the cloud are functioning properly? Third, NFV, SDN, Robert had mentioned it this morning, but that's an area where we're focused in helping look at the service chains, making sure everything's working properly. And then 5G, as customers move to virtual EPC and virtual IMS, how do you validate that network works properly? With CENGN, we're a tier 1 member, founding member like Juniper, very involved. We're offering a lot of our test agents in terms of validating how the services that we're trying at CENGN are working. And from a university standpoint, obviously, we see that collaboration both with the industry through CENGN, but with the universities as being key. And we've recently invested about $1.2 million with University of Laval in Quebec on photonic research. So happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Claudio. Last but not least, Ali from Telus.
Thank you very much. And I don't know if I have to say good morning or good afternoon, but anyways, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ali Tizghadam. I am with CTO team in Telus. If I want to give you a little bit of background of myself, my passion is building things. So 25 years ago, when I was doing my master's, I started building using actually artificial intelligence, which was one of the keynotes today. With the mixture of neural networks and the fuzzy logic, I built a car. On top of that, there was a pen, and the controller was keeping the pen vertical on the car. And that was actually a foundation of a soccer team, robot soccer team that we built in university later, which has won a couple of prizes worldwide after that. So then I went to industry, and in telecom, I built the first digital exchange, fully actually built in Middle East over there. And when I came to Canada to actually pursue my PhD, I built a pre-smart city platform, if you wish. It is a platform that hosts transportation data. And then in Telus, I'm actually leading the network softwareization strategy, and we are building a platform to enable our next wave of services that we are offering. So in terms of my company, Telus, I think Telus doesn't need any introduction here in this room. We are all Canadian, and Telus is one of the largest service providers in Canada. I'm proud to say that in 2017, most of the prestigious institutions recognized Telus as the fastest mobile network in Canada, including PCMag. And we have been leading the SD-WAN service introduction in Telus, and we already have introduced and launched it, and we keep adding services to that. And that by itself explains why I'm here, why Telus is a part of this panel. 5G and IoT are big parts of our strategy in Telus. We have high dreams on building services on top of them, and hopefully in the Q&A session, we are going to have more discussions on that. And in terms of CENGN, I think Chris already alluded to what we have been doing with CENGN last year. Last year here, actually, in the same city, we have been hosting, with the help of Juniper and CENGN, a very great hackathon with the students, primarily the co-ops at CENGN, I believe. And it was a lot of fun, and hopefully we're going to continue that.
Wonderful. Thanks. So we're going to kick off with a few questions. I'm going to lob the question to one of the panel members, but then we're going to expect them all to chime in where appropriate. And as we said, at the end, we'll try to have some questions for you. So please give us some thoughts as we go through this. First question, I'll start with you, Dan. We talk about large-scale IoT, and some of the examples you actually gave are related to IoT. In my introduction, I very quickly brushed over IoT as kind of table stakes. It's here, it's there. But when we really start to ask people, I think there's still a lot of confusion as to maybe what it is and how real it is, and if it is really old technology or new technology. I think even there may be a question, is it a technology, a platform, right, a calling? So where do you see we're at in IoT, and how critical is this for Canada and Canada's businesses?
Yeah, great question. So when you look at the promise of IoT, it's that we're going to be able to connect billions of devices, and it's going to change our lives with application areas such as smart buildings, smart agriculture, connected vehicles, and and on and on and on. But in order to actually connect billions of devices, you have to look at each of the individual use cases and make sure that they fit and that you have the infrastructure available to connect those devices in whatever way they need to be connected. Sometimes it's fiber, sometimes today it's LTE, or sometimes 2G. We're still connecting IoT. Actually, many of the IoT devices, if you look at the classic definition, are still on 2G networks. And I think we're very early in the cycle, and it's just in its infancy. I mean, people talk about IoT as being here and prevalent, but a lot of times they're talking about machine-to-machine communication with ATMs connected into the cloud and stuff like that. But I think when people talk about what the real promise of IoT is, it's about connecting devices across a disparate number of applications, across a disparate number of network technologies, and that's the real crux of the thing. So when you look at what it takes to make that happen and the future of IoT and the core technologies that are required, 5G is absolutely critical for all of those high bandwidth, low latency applications, such as connected vehicle and many of the other ones we've talked about. And I think, it's going to have the flexibility required to address a lot of those use cases. We also think that LoRa WAN is going to be a critical enabling technology for IoT, for all of those low-cost, low-power battery-operated devices that are required. And so when we look at the market, we think that, as they say, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a number of carriers with a bunch of different technologies and a whole ecosystem of end-user devices and applications to basically provide the data required that the data scientists can then use to figure out how to basically improve Canada's productivity and drive us to the top of the globe in terms of our national productivity. So,
how is IoT dominating the conversation in your businesses and kind of shaping?
Well, yeah, just a comment on on IoT's state and how it's going to change over the future. So yeah, I agree with Dan. IoT is here. It's it is proliferating. It's growing rapidly. But one of the big challenges that service providers are facing today is their operational costs are continuing to increase. Revenues are flat to declining in some cases. So the business case is diminishing. The margins for delivering these services are diminishing. We're going from ARPUs of $60+ for broadband users down to dollars for revenue per device, ARPDs. So what we have to consider as part of the evolutionary path for IoT is how to deliver large-scale IoT more cost-effectively, leveraging state-of-the-art in communications technologies, SDN, NFV, automation, orchestration technologies to provide much reduced operational overhead.
Ali, Claudio, yeah?
Yeah, I'll add. I agree with the guys in terms of we're just seeing the beginning of IoT, right? So when we're getting to large scale, especially as we move more to 5G infrastructures, I think we're going to see all these different applications. And one of the things that we're focused on as a company is obviously how's the network going to behave and be able to handle very different requirements for the different IoT services, right? There's a couple things. Number one is, yes, ARPUs are going down, but the network itself has to handle way more signaling than it typically has in the past, right? Very different than a call. You're looking at billions of devices accessing the network. Number two is we're going to be moving to much more mission-critical IoT, which means the need for lower latency. And lastly, it's every service from an IoT perspective, I think, is different. So network slicing is what you're hearing of in 5G, and they're looking at that now in terms of how do you segment an existing network, a 5G network, into multiple slices to handle different services. So those three things are really what kind of drive our engagement with customers. And I think Chris mentioned it well. It's automation and analytics, right? So how can you automate the way you manage those networks? For example, there was a good quote from DT that was saying they're comparing themselves on how they compare to cloud providers. And I think Alvin mentioned it this morning. You need to transform. They looked at how much revenue they're making today by the amount of employees they have versus Facebook. Facebook does about 1.6 million per employee at Facebook, if you look at their revenue divided by number of employees, and DTAG makes about 300K. So if you see ARPU going down as we're bringing more and more of these IoTs, it's all about automation and bringing insights, right? So that's where we're focused, whether it's in the RAN or in the backhaul, in the core. It's how do you bring automation insights so that the network can behave properly, can handle these next generation IoT services, and they're profitable for the service provider.
I just want to add one more comment, topping up on what the other panelists mentioned. So on top of the automation, there are some more issues that needs to be addressed, if you will. And by the way, I have a suggestion for our lovely CENGN Summit organizers. Please next time move these projectors to the sites. So
We'd like to see you.
By the way, one of the challenges that as a service provider, as a communication owner of a communication network, I see is in the addressing billions of devices that are going to be connected together. Right? It is projected that in 2020, 50 billion devices are going to be connected. So now I get that we have IPv6 and we have a lot of addresses, but is it IPv6 a good solution for that? Don't we need to go into named space, such as, for example, information-centric networking, where we are replacing the address-based communication with the content-based or name-based communication? Those are the questions that us as service provider would like to be answered. And since CENGN is having relationship with universities, basically that's an academic question that needs to be addressed. Is it IPv6 going to be solution? Is it ICN? What flavor of ICN? Is it name data networking? Is it going to be mobility first? I would like to open this question for the academic people here.
Well, let's build on this a little. So expectations of IoT are growing, use cases are becoming more complex, and we don't know what the use cases of the future may look like per se, right? From, I think, what, 18 billion devices today to 20 in the next few years to 50 billion in the next 5 years. So I think, Chris, you made the comment around the networks we're going to need, right? That need to be cost effective, low latency. Now, so then in comes the 5G conversation. And as I said, I may be the one that knows the least about 5G, but can you maybe explain a little bit about the evolution or the development and where we're at with 5G? Thinking in my limited knowledge here that you guys just came from upgrading everything to LTE and probably spending billions and billions of dollars. How are we going to take this to the next level, and whereabouts in this journey are we?
Yeah, so we see 5G as not necessarily a discrete solution being delivered at a discrete point in time. It's, it's not just the destination, it's also a journey to that destination. So there's a lot of transformation that needs to happen between now and when we're launching like 5G RAN technologies, 5G core technologies that can start today, and it already is starting today. These are foundational technologies like 5G is heavily dependent on virtualization to do what it needs to do. So a lot of service providers are already embarking on NFVI transformation strategies, putting those in place. And again, that'll serve as a foundation for 5G, more seamless 5G introduction in the future. And then there's overlaying technologies on top of that, edge compute, so leveraging NFVI, So virtualized functions in the network with edge compute to push applications closer to the end user for lower latency applications like critical services. There's network slicing that Claudio mentioned, allowing you to run multiple logical networks over a shared physical infrastructure to, again, lower the operating costs, ensure end-to-end quality of service and SLAs for your customers. And again, just to make sure you're maximizing the efficiency of the network and not over-provisioning.
Claudio?
Yeah, so I agree with Chris. Actually, a lot of focus on 5G has been, when you look at the press, it's all about the radio, right? But the reality is the network itself, the service providers are investing today, right? So if, Chris mentioned a few of them, but fiber deeper into the access as well for the RAN. You're seeing FTTA, so fiber being brought up right to the radio head. And then architectures like centralized RAN, where the BBUs are being centralized, and then overlays with network slicing and so forth, right? So people are looking at that. NFV is going to be a critical component. And there's a lot of activity, and I would say kind of experimentation that's happening now. So even in 4G, you're looking at some parallel NFV-based networks for connected car, for example, right? So rather than you leverage the existing infrastructures, build a virtualized infrastructure for specific services, and then migrate that over time as 5G becomes deployed. So I think, you know, fiber deeper, NFV, edge computing, centralized offices being converted to data centers. So you hear the CORD initiatives that Verizon and others are talking about. That's all in preparation for this next generation network of 5G.
Dan, before you chime on this, maybe I can add a question here. So the federal government issued this Smart City Challenge. I'm sure you all have been called on by municipalities saying, oh my God, what does this mean? And we need IoT-izing our city, and they probably have no clue what that means, and they're talking about use cases, and I suspect many of you are some way getting involved in these discussions, right? So with 5G not completely like there, I guess, and you talked about LoRa WAN earlier, and this to be transitional, and it always will be probably, where do you see we can play a role in accelerating or the development of the mix of networks to support, for instance, the real use cases that municipalities are going to try to get serious funding for?
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. Yeah, I mean, obviously 5G is hugely important to the country, and every country and every carrier is a little bit different. You know, the Orange guys are saying, you know, it's not a priority till 2020. Verizon saying we're going to deploy pre-standardization in 2018. So I think you're seeing all over the map, you know, people are aware of it, people are thinking about it. Canada's going to have a leadership position, that's great. But, you know, you also have to look at what are the real, you know, businesses, cities, everyone has real problems that they need to solve today. And those problems, as you alluded to with the smart city, you know, there's another one. Well, what is a smart city? Well, no one really knows. So you got to dig down into the use cases, and you got to go, okay, well, what I really want is smart parking, so that when people go to a destination, you know, they're going to minimize the carbon emissions, and they're going to, you know, be able to more efficiently get to their parking spot in the location they're going to. And then what you also need to do is you need to basically look at it and go, okay, well, cities now, instead of sending guys around chalking tires every 2 hours, you know, to see if somebody's been parking there too long, why not just have, you know, a parking puck in the pavement enabled by LoRa WAN that says, hey, the car's been here 1 hour and 55 minutes, right? So, and then you can send the bylaw officer right there. So that's what I'm talking about. There's all these use cases that can really improve our lives and improve, you know, our productivity. Metering and sub-metering. You know, utilities have one meter that goes into large buildings and with multi-tenant commercial guys and residential. And if you want to go to like 100 meters because you want everyone to get their own individual bill, now you got to install 100 meters, you got to run, you know, maybe power to some of those meters, you got to run, you got to read those meters every month. So again, why not use a technology that exists today like LoRa WAN to basically provide real-time communication on meter readings or near real-time every 15 to 30 minutes. So that's what, just back to the question. So 5G is critical. LoRa WAN's here today. It's been broadly deployed in Europe. We think it's going to figure prominently in the Smart City Challenge that the government has announced, as well as the Supercluster Initiative across advanced manufacturing and Smart Ag and all the other superclusters that are happening. We think that the government getting back behind these technologies and these approaches and these end-use applications is absolutely critical. To, again, our national productivity and our standing in the world. And, we as a company, we're very, very partnership-centric. So, of course, all of the, wireless carriers are we're their customer because we use their backhaul in some cases. And we would really like to partner to make sure that all, applications get looked after. So, we think that 5G today is obviously very early in its evolution. IoT is very early in its evolution, and that LoRa WAN, as we look to Europe and Asia for its place in accelerating the adoption of IoT, is going to be very, very critical.
Well, Ali, you and your company have been leading in IoT for many years, right? Your healthcare practice, what you do in municipalities, and you've been building and expanding and growing the networks to support all this. As you see the move to 5G, and with all the other networks that you can leverage as you take on, I'm sure you're in Vancouver helping there with their smart city play. How is this transformation that you see happening underneath from 4G, LTE, 5G, LoRa WAN, changing how we think about services, and how is that having an impact on your business?
Okay, so let me start from here. Generally, all of the service providers are transitioning to a new era. The type of services that we are going to offer is changing. Traditionally, we have been offering long life services such as voice, data, TV, and wireless. Now, we are about to offer services with much shorter life cycle, but rapidly coming and going, such as, for example, bandwidth calendaring, right? So what that means is that we need to be able to reshape our network rapidly, quickly. So to deploy a service, to retire a service gracefully, but very quickly. So there are some requirements for that. The first requirement is network programmability. So we need to have a programmable network in the infrastructure. So programmable optics, segment routing, NFV, SDN, and now with the emergence of what I would like to add is the feature that 5G brings, the beamforming to focus the energy and the power where we need. So these are all parts of the puzzle. So we need to have that infrastructure, and that's one of the things that we think that has to be built, and TELUS is doing that now. But assuming that this programmable infrastructure is there, now it becomes to IoT and applications of IoT similar to smart city that you mentioned. So we are looking at many different new services to offer in that domain, including, for example, smart home, including smart city as a platform. But let me be more specific. When I'm talking about smart city, let me bring up one critical example that actually is tied to the discussions that my other friends had here in the panel. So emergency evacuation is going to be a very critical part of services that service providers are going to offer as in smart city. What is emergency evacuation? If there is a natural disaster, for example, and all of the communications are cut, what are we going to do? We are going to have a service provider in a box. So network programmability and the reach of the 5G and the beamforming of 5G will enable us to actually cover the area that we want to cover in order to rapidly and quickly evacuate the disaster area, right? I just give you one example to open the discussion on that.
Well, and I think, Chris, you opened up earlier talking about rising costs, reducing revenue, so being able to spin up new services, create new offerings is probably becoming more important for the telco or anybody really to stay current and So this is more about reimagining a business model almost than the technology that supports it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a huge factor in driving these forward as services in the market, right? There has to be a viable business case. And the only way to have a viable business case for large-scale deployment is to deal with the operational overhead, right, and the rising costs. One of the key aspects, leveraging Alvin's discussion earlier on analytics, and taking advantage of NFVI infrastructure where everything is virtualized in a network, having real-time predictive analytics that is looking at the network, the subscribers, the applications, analyzing it in real time and making decisions integrated back into the orchestration environment to optimize the network in real time, self-heal, elastic scale, etc. That's going to be really important to improve the economics, improve the end customer experience.
So, Claudio, do you see this change in the business that you're in terms of providing the insights and the data and the capability to, I guess, optimizing and measuring and testing networks? So from operation support systems and management layers, do you see big change coming?
Yeah, I think it ties into what Ali and Chris were mentioning. Ali's talking about programmability. That's going to be obviously the key component as these services evolve, right? And orchestration, network service orchestration, that whole IT element is going to play a major role. If you look at analytics and just understanding all the data that is available in the network, so big data, machine learning, those are going to really transform the way the OSS infrastructure is going to be built. One of the key components, though, and I think it was in Alvin's slide, where it's the data, right? You need to get the data for the algorithms to improve and to be effective. So one of the areas that's transforming our industry for EXFO is really, we have a lot of insight in terms of what's happening in the network, right? So multi-dimensional KPIs that could be fed into either, as Chris mentioned, the orchestration element that has a policy control that we could feed so that the network can react based on what's happening to the service or the network, and then also provide a lot more visibility and data set into the machine learning algorithms to then better improve the network, right? So when we talk about multidimensional, obviously there's KPIs that you're getting from the compute and infrastructure that NFV is going to be based on. You'll be getting information from the network in terms of the transport network from the fiber providers. But on our side, where we see us adding value is being able to synthetically create transactions in the network so that we can actually take a heartbeat of services or KPIs that are important for that service and see any degradation before it actually impacts the service, right? Send that up to that upper layer, both through active probes and as well as software probes that listen to the transactions that are happening and be able to feed important KPIs into that overall OSS and analytics layer. So I think by providing a lot of insight into those engines, the networks will be able to automate, self-heal, and provide a lot more insight so that the operator can continue to tune the network as new and new services are being put on.
So I realize this is quite a deep conversation with a lot of elements and layers to this, and with 50 minutes we probably can't do justice to all the components of this. But we have 5 minutes left on the clock, and maybe one or two questions. And if we have one question, one answer, maybe we can squeeze in 3. So I see one hand there, so if there's going to be other questions lining up, there's a mic behind you, please. Could you maybe say who you represent?
Dennis Condi, I'm the founder of Smart Parking. Thanks for the plug, by the way. I was in Chicago 3 weeks ago meeting with Google, and they're spreading their mesh network throughout Chicago. And of course, they're hoping that that's going to replace the cell phone network. How do you think Telus and other groups are going to be handling that kind of pressure, especially as you mentioned, pricing is coming down. It's going to be very affordable. Something like starts off at $5 a month for so much data. How are you going to handle that as an industry in communications as it transitions, especially with a powerhouse like Google backing this?
If you can have one answer, who would like you to give that answer?
Tell us, please.
Tell us, Ali.
Okay, let me take it this way. It's not just about smart parking. Actually, it's about everything. So the cloud providers are coming, Googles and Amazons of the world are coming, and they are danger to us, right? But we have one advantage, and that advantage is the reach and the network that we have. If we are smart enough as service provider to take advantage of that and build on top of that, we are not going to lose. That's my personal opinion. Let me actually elaborate on that a little bit, which is complementing what the other panelists said on the last question. So when we are talking about new services, when we are talking about orchestration, which is a buzzword that everybody is using, and service chaining, all that means to us is actually to be able to offer quickly the new innovative services. Now, when it comes to IoT, when it comes to smart city, I always add one layer to that orchestration, which is data orchestration, information orchestration, knowledge orchestration. As long as a service provider can do the knowledge orchestration and can build the services by combining analyzed data from different parts of the network, they are going to be in the competition. That's my personal take on that.
I'm sure the other panels would like to chime in, but I'd like to see if we can squeeze another question or two in. Who has another question? Over here, in the front, please. There's a mic coming. Give it, please. If you could also say who you represent and think about who you want the answer from.
Yeah, so my name is John Wilkinson. I work for a company called CloudOps. I would like Chris to answer this question because he's not a telco. So with the other, the big boys coming into town, like you mentioned, Google, Amazon, so on and so forth, doesn't it make sense? Because I disagree with you, Ali. I don't think that just reach is going to save you. I think that's going to hurt you in the long run. It's what people want. That'll always be more important. But in order to kind of lower the cost of the 5G rollout, isn't it time that the different telcos and operators actually start working together and perhaps even start with a consortium to roll out the networks? And at least that would at least share the burden of the cost. And with everything being virtualized, each of the separate companies can then focus on their strengths, but at least have the underlying infrastructure rolled out and in a manner that's not just been done by Telus or Bell or Rogers or whoever separately, but in corporation.
Just before I address your question, so cloud operators are the industry is leveraging them for like a benchmark for the potential for operational improvement, right, and lowering costs to deliver new services. So the industry tends to look at the operational overhead, number of technicians per server in a data center, and so there's an opportunity for service providers to decrease their operational overhead by almost 2 orders of magnitude, leveraging some of the principles that are deployed by cloud operators, such as yourself, which have built, the big guys, the Googles and the Amazons have built their infrastructure from the ground up, their own SDN, before SDN was even a household acronym, their own SDN, their own NFE, their own orchestration engines, everything is fully automated. So massive opportunity. I think there is a great opportunity for service providers to collaborate, and there's a lot of collaboration going on through the standards bodies, and there is some in collaboration in other spaces. Here in Canada, like Telus and Bell doing RAN sharing, and maybe there's opportunities to extend that through 5G network slicing in the future. So I believe there's benefits to that, but there are also competitors in this market today. So there's pros and cons.
I'm sure Ali and others would have a thought, but we have 12 seconds left, and I promise to end this session on time. So I wanted to thank all of you to sit through this, but maybe more importantly, our panel members, Chris Bachalo, Dan Mathers, Claudio Mazzuca, and Ali Tizghadam for sharing their expertise. I think it's lunch now, and I think some of you have some places to run to. So thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.